This is CBC Here and Now.
We wouldn't want to put this out under normal circumstances, but we felt it was necessary because we do want to show that we're fully transparent.
The lockout in Grand Falls-Windsor ended months ago, but some arguments linger. Garrett Berry has those details.
Feel like it's getting windier? You're not wrong.
We've seen a sudden increase in the number of windy days.
What's behind that? That's coming up.
Well, it's like someone shook the snow globe today on the Avalon. A little bit more snow on the way as we head through the evening hours tonight, and then a warm-up for the weekend.
Good evening and welcome to Here and Now. I'm Peter Cowan. It was another deadly day for COVID-19 in this province. 4 more people have died. That's 7 deaths over just the last 2 days. 2 of those deaths are in the eastern region, a woman in her 40s and a man over the age of 70. In western, a woman over the age of 70 has died, and a woman over the age of 70 has also died in Labrador-Grenville Health Region. There are still 20 people in hospital because of the virus, with 7 of those in the ICU. Those numbers are the same as yesterday. Today's COVID update showed there were 378 new confirmed cases since yesterday, once again most in the health region, and a change in some of the rules today. These ones around visitors for long-term care homes. Effective immediately, 1 support person or visitor is allowed for each patient or resident. This change affects provincially operated acute care facilities, health care centres, privately run long-term care, personal care, and community care homes. As protocols and plans are being put in place for kids to go back to school, some parents feel like they're being left out. They're frustrated by repeated daycare closures, and they're calling on the province to spend more time on the COVID-19 policies for daycares. Here Now's Meg Roberts explains.
There can be up to 30 children in her daycare. Every time one of them is a positive, are we shutting down for 10 days?
It's the question Sarah Dyson is asking herself following the closure of her daughter's daycare. It left her and her husband scrambling, trying to work full-time and take care of their 3-year-old daughter. Dyson says she has lots of questions about the protocol surrounding daycares.
I think everyone was so focused on taking care of the school-age children, we've kind of forgot about the daycare children. So, what are our next steps? We've heard that there will be rapid tests for daycares, but what does that mean? Will every time our child wakes up with a runny nose, will we have to take a test? We haven't gotten any guidance.
Dyson says her daughter has already had 8 COVID-19 tests, more than her and her husband combined.
We felt like we were thrown to the wolves, totally negated, and left out to tread water for ourselves.
A St. John's daycare owner says they aren't getting enough guidance from the provincial government despite being at full capacity since January, all while dealing with a completely unvaccinated population. Happy Times Preschool was closed for 14 days due to COVID. However, after calling 811 back, they were told they only had to close for 5 days. She says daycares were the guinea pigs for the government's back-to-school plans.
We are part of the education system. We are birth to 5 years before children start school. And it's about time the government recognizes that and starts, giving us the proper help that we need and funding that we need to provide quality childcare.
Last Thursday, there were 53 daycare closures across the province and 9 partial closures. This Thursday, there are 21 full closures and 18 partial closures. The Department of Education says the length of the closures can vary depending on circumstances. Some services may reopen after a day or 2, depending on the situation. The department says when daycares become aware of a positive case, they're asked to notify public health. Public health workers will determine who was exposed and who needs to get tested based on a number of factors. But parents like Dyson are wondering how many parents are feeling the pressure from constant uncertainty. Meg Roberts, CBC News, St. John's.
A beautiful day out there today. Even saw some snow for the Avalon starting earlier this afternoon. It certainly feels like winter out there. Let's take a look at what's going on. There is a ridge of high pressure to the south, but things are a little bit unsettled. These flurries are actually moving from north to south across the Avalon, as you can see there. But otherwise, nothing really happening. We do have some of that cold air in place. And as we head through the next couple of days, some more cold air is going to move in up across Labrador. And then as we get into Saturday and Sunday, that's when the next weather maker is going to move in, already prompting a special weather statement for all of the island and up the coast of Labrador. I'll have the full forecast details when I come back.
Thanks, Ashley. It's looking like a windy weekend, and if you think it's been windy a lot lately, you're not alone. As Ashley pointed out last week, data from Environment Canada shows the number of windy days in St. John's is climbing. Why is it so windy, and what does the wind mean for this place? Well, here now's Enrica Wilhelm finds out.
This is probably one of the windiest places in St. John's, but you don't have to only come here to find wind. It's everywhere, and there's been more of it. It's been extra windy lately. Raw data for the last 30 years shows since 2012 the province has seen well over 100 days per year with winds of at least 60 kilometers per hour.
We have actually seen a decades-long decrease in wind to what was really a noticeable low period in terms of days with high winds in those 2000s. Now again, since then we've abruptly sprung back to conditions that maybe we would have expected to see back in the 80s or even the 70s. So slow decline, rapid increase in a very short period of time.
What is making it windier? A complex issue with no clear answer.
There's a lot of potential explanations there. But then the links again to climate change are not 100% clear and obvious. Generally speaking though, I'd say that as the planet warms up and as the Arctic warms up a lot, and places like the tropics and subtropics warm up relatively little by comparison, we'd actually expect to see that there's less energy available to drive these storms, which sort of gives you a sense of how complex these relationships can be. We expect to see things declining, but on a local scale, you might actually see more of these storms passing by just because the preferred track shifts.
Local trees have adapted to the wind, but newly introduced species often struggle. Another possible impact, erosion.
If we have walking trails where a lot of people are walking along the coast, that will tend to kill the vegetation. And then if we have more wind and more moisture being able to infiltrate into the ground in those areas, then we can start to get the sea slope failures there. We can lose pieces of the trail, as happened in Torbay a few years ago.
Rather than the ecosystem, humans will have to adapt.
We will have to look at the types of species that we are choosing to plant. We'll have to look at where we're planting them with respect to planting them too close to a house or too close to a power line. If we do have an increase in temperature and precipitation, many of our trees will grow faster. And that then will mean that they'll grow higher in places where we may not want that to happen.
Finnis says it's also hard to predict whether high winds will stay a common occurrence. Things could calm down in the next couple of years, or it could take a decade. Henrike Wilhelm, CBC News, St. John's.
Well, the Director of Public Prosecution says they're not pursuing further criminal charges against 9 correctional officers accused of an inmate's death. Jonathan Henoch died at Her Majesty's Penitentiary in November 2019 after an altercation. Some officers were charged with manslaughter, others faced charges of negligence causing death. A provincial court judge dismissed most of the charges in December after a preliminary inquiry. In a news release, Lloyd Strickland says a second medical opinion found that Henoch may have died from a pre-existing medical condition. Strickland says in a statement, with divergent opinions from duly qualified medical experts, the Crown attorneys are compelled to conclude that there is no likelihood that any of the previously charged individuals would be convicted. Strickland says the evidence fails to demonstrate that correctional officers markedly departed from the standard of care expected. Well, now to some national news. The Canada Revenue Agency is sending out a new round of letters to those who received federal aid through the pandemic lockdowns. The CRA is again verifying the eligibility of the millions of Canadians who received the $500 a week CERB benefit. The letters will target those whose tax filings suggest they may have earned more than the $1,000 a month allowed over and above the CERB checks. The letters say the CRA will work on a flexible repayment plan, but it warns that it won't be the case for those who don't respond. Officials in Grand Falls-Windsor say they're trying to turn the page following last year's contentious lockout. But as Here Now's Garrett Berry reports, statements today suggest there are some lingering frustrations.
Last year, residents of Grand Falls-Windsor saw their weekly waste pickup turn into a labor battleground.
The decision, as we said many times, was very difficult, and it was a terrible time for a lot of people, very emotional time for all those involved, and we recognize all that.
And still, signs that despite town council's efforts to turn the page,
we want to move on. We want to get back to what makes Grand Falls-Windsor a great community.
There's still frustration among some residents over last year's 3-month lockout.
I don't feel that so much within the organization, but certainly there are some again in town who seem to continue on with a bit of an obsessive view towards it, and asking for information and making accusations. So
it's somewhat unusual, but today town council released a cost breakdown claiming that the lockout saved money because of a lot of wages the town office didn't pay.
Wouldn't want to put this out under normal circumstances, but we felt it was necessary because we do want to show that we're fully transparent and here are the numbers.
Why would you call it obsessive?
Just individuals, who sometimes, won't let things go at all. And I'm not talking about any of the employees of the union, to be honest with you. It's just citizens who tend to, be making accusations and asking questions and on a regular basis, and we want to get the information out.
The document says the town spent $1.1 million during the lockout, mostly to outside contractors, but saved $1.9 million in wages, insurance, and pension payments. The mayor says the town's not claiming the lockout was good, but
if someone asked me if it was worth it, I would say yes, but because it was necessary. And unfortunately, I felt it didn't have to go to that point to achieve the things that we were looking to achieve.
But CUPE, which represents those locked out workers, says the lockout was political, not financial. Writing in a statement, had the mayor taken the negotiations more seriously from the beginning and not just during the last few weeks, a deal could have been reached sooner. And adding, the mayor cannot be good at math if he's implying that the town saved money. The cost of the work that would have been provided had there been no lockout must be factored in. The mayor says he doesn't want to continuously relitigate. He wants today's letter to residents to be the last word.
We want to get the information out, but I don't think some of these people are ever going to stop. But that's why I say I want this to be the last step for the town. Here's the information, and let's move forward in a positive direction.
Garrett Berry, CBC News, Gander.
Well, truckloads of PEI potatoes have started to arrive at food banks across Canada, including some in this province. So far, 22 tractor-trailer loads have been sent from PEI to Nova Scotia, Newfoundland and Labrador, Ontario, and Quebec. A man from PEI, now living in Toronto, is helping to organize those donations.
These 200 loads are going to be used, and they're going to reach a lot of people that really need it. And there's no reason why they can't have access to, quality nutrition, especially with the rising prices of everything else. This is the opportunity where we can hopefully not have too many hungry people in Canada this year.
The potatoes that have come in to feed Nova Scotia, I am hugely excited about that. The whole team is excited because we see the impact that giving bags of potatoes to people who can't afford to put food on the table, it's a big moment.
The potatoes can't be sold in the United States. The PEI Potato Board says it hopes more than 300 loads will be shipped to food banks across the country. It says farmers are being paid what it calls a fair price, and the funds are being spread out to growers as evenly as possible. Meanwhile, there are major developments tonight on that American ban on PEI potatoes. There was a high-level meeting in Washington today. Ottawa says it is now confident that potatoes will start moving to parts of the United States within weeks.
I'm very pleased with this meeting with Secretary Vilsack. We had a very important discussion, obviously, on potato ward and on a path forward to reopen the market for table stock potatoes, starting with Puerto Rico, in a very short notice.
This is a big issue for potato farmers in Prince Edward Island. We're concerned about all aspects of the potato industry, but for Vilsack to turn to his APHIS, the head of APHIS, and indicate that He expected potatoes to go to Puerto Rico in 1 to 2 weeks. That was great news for me to hear. And he did indicate that, as my colleague said, that it will take a few weeks more to get into the mainland United States.
Nice start to the weekend. Looks like a nice day to get out and enjoy the snow. However, looks like by the end of the weekend, that's all going to be gone. I'll have the full forecast when I come back.
We were calling it breakfast at home, but really it was a gift card to those families who truly needed it, that had school-age children at home. And through that program, we were able to support 1,355 families in Newfoundland and Labrador in the last couple of weeks.
Many children rely on school not just to stay smart, but to eat smart as well. More from the foundation that's been feeding students at school and at home. That's just ahead.
While many people continue to work from home like I am today, children have returned to the classroom. Now, public health officials say in-person instruction is important, not just for a child's mental health, but also for their physical health. Especially for children who rely on schools to provide healthy meals that they might not get at home. And joining me now to talk more about this is Selena Stoyles, the executive director of the Kids Eat Smart Foundation. So your organization provides free breakfast to students in school. And Dr. Janice Fitzgerald said one of the big reasons why she wanted to reopen schools is so that students can access programs like the one offered by the Kids Eat Smart Foundation. So can you give us a sense of just how big the need is in the province?
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn. You know, one of the things that this pandemic has brought to the forefront is that families are struggling. And during these very challenging times, families still continue to struggle. So our goal, even as schools were closed, was to ensure that children and youth who were home had access to food at home.
Can you give us a sense of the effort that went into maintaining the program while children were out of schools?
Yeah, you know, when schools closed and we knew that we had to find a new way to serve, immediately we reached out, you know, to our grocery store partners, to volunteers, to the community center staff, and to our small team who are all working from home to make that happen. And it was because of all of that partnership and people coming together, we were able to ensure that the children in Newfoundland and Labrador, those that needed access to food in their home, that we were able to do that.
About how many children use the service every day?
Every school day, we're now serving almost 38,000 meals every school day to school-age children and youth, which means when they come to school, you know what, it's a welcoming, universal program. So every child, every youth who would like to have access to food and have breakfast, they can do that. And last year, it was about 5.4 million meals during the school year.
And I know it's only been a few days since children went back to school, but what are you hearing from the volunteers who are there, who are handing out the meals to the children? What kind of stories are they hearing from the children, and how are they reacting to being back in school?
You know, and I think we've all seen the social media over the last couple of days. And when you see those smiling faces and those beautiful children and youth who are glad to be back in school, we have to say a huge, you know, heartfelt thanks to the principals, the custodials, the administrators, and the teachers. They are the ones who are making it happen. Children are happy to be back, especially those most vulnerable who truly do not have food in their house or live in food insecure homes. So we're just so thrilled and pleased and humbled that our breakfast clubs are a go, and every day when children come to school, they have access to breakfast.
Well, Selena Stoyles, thank you so much for this, and thanks for this update.
Thank you so much, Carolyn.
Here in St. John's, it was quite the winter wonderland out there this afternoon, Ashley, with quite a bit of snow seemed to be coming down.
Yeah, we had a bunch of bands starting earlier this afternoon, move through, dropped a couple of centimeters out there for sure, and temperatures were quite nice today, so it felt beautiful. Nice winter day out there for sure. Let's take a look at those temperatures across the board. Reached a high near -3 in St. John's today. Those temperatures a little bit cooler certainly as you head towards Central, Gander, Twillingate around -7. And those temperatures into the minus double digits for Corner Brook, Lassie. Same thing for St. Anthony, hovering around -14. And then relatively mild, considering what it has been up across the Big Land, with those temperatures somewhere between -14 to -20. Now those temperatures pretty much sitting there right now. We do have a bit of a wind chill out there, so if you're planning on heading out and shoveling what did fall, you're going to want to bundle up. Feeling more like -12 in St. John's, and -16 right now is what it's feeling like in Badger. So taking a look at the current satellite radar, most of the snow is on the Avalon, at least as far as what's being picked up on the radar. And if I zoom in a little bit, it's starting to move off now. So we should see those flurries ending within the next, I'd say, hour or so by the time we get to 7, 8 o'clock. Most of that snow should have ended. Still looking at the chance of a few flurries along the west coast, and same thing for the southern areas of the island, and then up across Labrador as well. A few flurries possible tonight. Looks like those flurries will redevelop as we get into the early morning hours, particularly on the west coast, and then by morning for the south coast. Now, temperatures tonight will be chilly into the minus teens. Those winds are going to ease though, certainly for the east. Still along the west coast though, you're looking at those winds gusting out of the southwest somewhere between 20 to 40 kilometers per hour. Coastal areas may see those winds gusting as high as 60, and those temperatures again minus 17 in Corner Brook tonight. That extreme cold morning has ended, but Lab City is still going to see a low near minus 31 tonight, with those winds out of the southwest around 30 to 50 kilometers per hour. Now, these temperatures for you are actually going to warm up as we get towards the morning hours. So as far as that snow goes, we're going to see that continue for a good chunk of tomorrow morning. Same thing for southeastern Labrador, and you may pick up a couple of centimeters with this one as well. And as the day goes on, the potential for flurries will head further east as well. And then by the time we get into the overnight, that's when some of that milder air is going to start to move in towards early morning Saturday for eastern areas of the island, and we could see some of that fall as rain. So as far as accumulations go, this will take us through tomorrow, through the day. You can see somewhere between 5 to 10 centimeters along the strait for both Newfoundland and in Labrador. Could see those a little bit higher, those amounts a little bit higher, closer to 10 to 15 in some of those areas because the temperatures are fairly cold. Now along the south coast and the higher elevations on the west coast, you're looking at somewhere between 5 to 10 centimeters by the time Saturday morning rolls around. Now there will be much more snow that will move in Saturday into Sunday, so we'll definitely get into some of those details a little bit later. But as far as tomorrow goes, those winds generally out of the southwest, 20 kilometers per hour, temperatures minus single digits, some sunshine, also some flurries for the east. Same thing through central with your temperatures hovering into the minus single digits, hovering around 0 degrees for the south coast, right along. And then as we head towards the west coast, those winds will be out of the southwest, 20 to 40 kilometers per hour. And again, with more steady flurries for you. And Mary's Harbour will see a high near minus 5 through the day, minus 9 in Cartwright, but that colder air will move in, certainly as the evening rolls through. Happy Valley Goose Bay should see a high near minus 11, and then those temperatures will drop. Minus 27 for Lab City. Again, your temperatures will start a bit warmer and then drop as the day goes on. So winds for you will be out of the west around 20 to 40 kilometers per hour. So the weekend does look pretty messy, starting as snow, changing over to rain, but the potential for some blizzard conditions up across Labrador. I'll get into some of those details when I come back.
Thanks, Ashley. A cross-Canada truck convoy is making its way through Ontario on the way to Ottawa.
When we got our vaccines when we were kids, they were a vaccine. It was a one-time deal. It was something a lot of research went into. And now it's, to me, it's basically a flu shot. That's really all it is. It's people that are all vaccinated, they're getting sick, they're passing it on the same as anybody and everybody else, right?
Protesters want the mandatory vaccine mandate rescinded. Police all along the route are warning of traffic disruptions. Officials in Ottawa are beefing up security and preparing for counter-demonstrations. Both Canada and the U.S. have made vaccinations mandatory for people crossing the border. The Ontario Trucking Association says the regulations will not be changing the way truckers, will not be changing, and the truckers will have to be vaccinated. And a group of truckers from Atlantic Canada and their supporters are making their way to the capital. Group left from Enfield, Nova Scotia, north of Halifax before dawn this morning. They plan to stop in Quebec tonight and arrive in Ottawa by Sunday.
Well, a record number of COVID-19 deaths today in what's been a deadly wave.
You've got lots of questions. We've got some answers for you coming right up. Well, New Brunswick is coming out of its strict lockdown 2 days earlier than expected. The province went into a lockdown 2 weeks ago in an attempt to slow the spread of Omicron. As of midnight tomorrow, the province will lift the restrictions that have kept schools and many businesses closed. New Brunswick's Chief Medical Officer of Health says the province has delayed the peak and the intensity of this latest wave.
By staying within your one household bubble, following public health guidance, and getting vaccinated, you have helped us blunt the impact of this latest wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. You have helped us to slow down the rise in hospitalizations and enabled our healthcare system to better manage a very difficult situation. Over the past 2 weeks, New Brunswickers have stepped up for our province. Your actions have given our public health team the confidence to recommend to Cabinet that the province return to Level 2 in our COVID-19 winter plan.
Well, Peter, between the record number of COVID-19 deaths we're seeing today and students returning to the classroom this week, we know that a lot of people out there have a lot of questions about the COVID situation in the province right now, and you've been working on getting some of those answers. So let's start with the number of deaths. It's been startling to see that number rise so quickly, but how does the number of deaths we're seeing now compared to previous waves?
Yeah, Carolyn, there's a number of ways that we can look at this, but let's start by looking at a graph that looks at the total number of deaths that we've seen throughout the course of the pandemic. So this is all of the deaths since the beginning. We saw a spike in deaths last fall with the outbreaks of the Delta variant, especially in central Newfoundland. But so far, January 2022 has been the deadliest month of the pandemic so far. In fact, almost half of the deaths have been this month. Looking at it another way, it took 452 days at the start of the pandemic to have 7 deaths, and we've now had 7 deaths in just the last 2 days. So why are we seeing these deaths? Well, let's take a look at the next graph, and this will show us the total number of cases. In fact, 75% of the total confirmed cases of COVID-19 have been in the month of January. So that's larger than the percentage of deaths. Why is that? Well, a couple of explanations. One, Omicron has been more mild than previous variants. Also, that we've had very high vaccination rates, especially amongst the older population who are more likely to get serious disease or die from this. The other is that there tends to be a bit of a lag. It can be up to several weeks between when we see cases and when those turn into deaths. So it's likely that we are going to continue to see more deaths from this.
We get those case numbers every day, and along with those numbers, we also hear about all of the recoveries that happen every day. And this is something that I've really been wondering about. How do officials decide when someone is actually recovered?
Yeah, you're not the only one with this question, Carolyn. I've been getting that a lot in my inbox, and we got a bit of clarity from public health. For most of the pandemic, the way this has worked is if you test positive, then you have a public health nurse or someone else who's going to follow up with you. They're going to check in, and if after a certain period of time you have no symptoms, then they're going to declare you recovered. But like with so many things, Omicron has changed the way this works.
As everybody knows, that's just not possible anymore. And so at the moment, what we look at is if you are 10 days post test date and you are not seen as being hospitalized or having severe disease in some way, then you are considered recovered.
So when we do look at those recovery numbers every day, it is important to keep in mind that it's kind of more reflective of how many people tested positive 10 days ago. So like so many of our other numbers, it's less definitive than it used to be, Carolyn.
And, you know, with kids back in school now, people are wondering, well, if it's safe for the children to go back to school, does this mean that it's safe to resume other activities?
This is something that the Chief Medical Officer of Health has cautioned against. And so, you know, if your business or your recreational group is saying, oh wait, schools are open, so we're going to bring people back into the office or we're going to resume in-person activities. One of the phrases we've heard a lot at the briefings has been that schools should be the first to open and the last to close. Now, one of the examples that people have raised, for example, is movie theaters. Right now they're closed, but if you're putting 30 kids into a small classroom, why can't you have 30 people spaced out in a giant movie theater? And the answer from public health is that this sort of comes down to how important is this activity. For schools, they've decided in-person learning is very important, so they're willing to take a higher risk. They're willing to have a few more cases because of this activity. So if you compare that to, say, the latest Spider-Man movie, which, while I hear it's very good, is considered less essential. And everything that they do open up is going to lead to more interactions and the potential for more cases.
Now is not really the time to be expanding your bubble. We are reporting about 300 new lab confirmed cases per day, and this will increase in the coming weeks as a direct or indirect result of school exposures. Schools are essential, so we have to accept that increase so that children can get back to where they need to be. To balance that essential increase that we will see, we need to avoid a similar increase from non-essential activities.
Okay, Peter, so let's talk about hospitalizations. We know that there are 20 people in hospital because of COVID-19, but what about the people who are there with COVID-19?
Yeah, these are two different numbers and they tell you two different things. So with COVID-19 tells you how many people have gotten COVID and it's been severe enough they've needed to go to the hospital. That's the 20. Right now, in total though, we have another 60 people who are in hospital and are positive with COVID. The issue is they're not there because of COVID, they're there for other reasons. So it could either be that they were admitted to hospital and tested positive, didn't even realize it, or it could have been that they picked up COVID while they were in hospital from staff or another patient. So two different numbers, and so far the province has been sticking with reporting that just with COVID numbers, but it is worth noting other provinces like Nova Scotia have started reporting both those numbers on a daily basis.
Okay, Peter, so much to talk about and more to come, I'm sure. Thank you so much for hunting down all those answers.
Anytime, Carolyn.
Another factor in the creation of the club was post-traumatic stress and the importance of having a safe, secure environment where these guys could talk it out.
Celebrating 80 years of the Crow's Nest in downtown St. John's, we're sailing back through its history just ahead. Well, today the Crow's Nest Officers Club in St. John's is celebrating its 80th anniversary. During the Second World War, the club was a retreat, a place where officers could relax, share stories, and enjoy a home-cooked meal. Today, the private members club and museum, like many spaces, is closed due to the pandemic. But its treasurer, as well as the club's oldest living member, connected with our colleagues at CBC Crosstalk this week to discuss its history.
In 1942, this club opened as the Seagoing Officers Club. It was the loft of a warehouse, a very basic room. They sat on barrels. The bar was just a few planks across a couple of sawhorses, all very makeshift, but it was a start. It's where the club started. I don't think anyone expected it to continue after the war, and certainly not into the new millennium. So the upstairs room we try to maintain as close as possible to its wartime look. We try to keep it like a time capsule. And so the best compliment we can get is when a veteran comes back and says it hasn't changed, and then we know we're doing it right.
The great thing about the Crow's Nest was it welcomed us with open arms, and it was a haven.
To the best of our knowledge, Peter Chance is our oldest member. He turned 101 last November. And Peter joined the Naval Reserve just before the war started.
First of all, I was in a ship out of Halifax. I then was moved up to operate out of St. John's, Newfoundland. We did the Newfie Dairy Run, as we called it. The greatest threat was not from the submarines, but from the ocean. Those mighty North Atlantic seas in the winter months. So when the bow plowed into a wave, we would shout from the bridge, "Here comes a green one!"
Another factor in the creation of the club was post-traumatic stress, and the importance of having a safe, secure environment where these guys could talk it out.
The atmosphere in the Crow's Nest was beyond comparison. It was just superb. Everybody was so friendly and outgoing, and they just took us in, all of us, close to their bosoms, as it were. It was just great, and I can't tell you how much that the Crow's Nest was appreciated by all of us in the North Newfie Dairy Run.
The Prime Minister has gone into isolation after being exposed to COVID-19. It's not the first time it's happened. He was exposed to COVID back in 2020 when his wife, Sophie Gregoire, contracted the virus on a trip to England. In a tweet this morning, he said, "Last night I learned that I have been exposed to COVID-19. My rapid test result was negative. I'm following health rules and isolating for 5 days. I feel fine and will be working from home. Stay safe, everyone, and please get vaccinated." During the pandemic, the Atlantic provinces have seen an influx of Canadians from other parts of the country. Now, that's put a strain on housing, and some tenants are feeling squeezed. New Brunswick is now facing some of the steepest rent increases in the country. And as Kayla Hounsel explains, some are calling on the province to do more.
Irene Murphy got word her rent was going up in December by nearly $400.
The biggest percentage of the tenants there are seniors. So a lot of us are on fixed incomes, and there's just no way that you can afford that kind of rent.
Murphy and her neighbors are not alone. Statistics Canada reports rents in all 4 Atlantic provinces have been increasing during the pandemic as Canadians flock east, but nowhere faster than in New Brunswick.
Tenants in New Brunswick have far fewer rights and protections than tenants almost anywhere else in the country.
This lawyer helped form the New Brunswick Coalition for Tenants' Rights 2 years ago after struggling to find housing himself. He says the crunch is partially due to a squeezed housing market and partially because of corporate landlords with no interest in affordable housing.
We're living in a Wild West situation where the government is unwilling or unable to recognize that there's a power imbalance between landlords and tenants.
Unlike in some other provinces, there are no rent caps in New Brunswick.
The data does show that provinces with rent control do not have a more favorable housing market in terms of affordability.
The minister responsible did not make herself available for an interview. In a statement, she notes in December the provincial government brought in measures to limit rent increases to once a year and require 6 months' notice.
There's still no limit on the amount you can increase rent by. You're still going to lose your home at the end of it.
For Murphy, paying the increase would mean giving up her vehicle, a loss of independence.
All they're looking at doing is padding their own bank accounts, and it doesn't really matter whether it's seniors or who it is that they're gouging.
She's already decided to move, but still wants the government to cap rent hikes so her new landlord can't also force her out of her home. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Halifax.
While looking across the pond, now England has lifted most of its COVID-19 public health measures. As of today, masks are no longer mandatory and vaccine passports have been shelved. The measures were introduced in December to slow the spread of the Omicron variant. Officials now say they are easing them because of England's successful vaccine booster rollout. The mask mandate remains in place in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. While members of Team Canada have arrived in Beijing along with their coaches and other team officials. Workers outfitted in full PPE gear are screening and testing new arrivals. The Canadian contingent arrived on a chartered flight that took off from Vancouver yesterday. It also includes CBC's team of journalists who will bring you full coverage of the games, including Anthony Germain, which is maybe why you're wondering why he's not here tonight. He's been in Toronto and will soon make his way to the games as well. Well, there's a small fish that still makes a big splash. The silvery smelt remains a favorite in many parts of Atlantic Canada. While the pandemic has put traditional community smelt fries on hold, harvesting of the fish continues, and it hasn't changed much over the years. Take a look.
A smelt is a delicate, tasty little critter, fish that we have here in many of the maritime provinces. But here in Miramichi Bay, it's a delicacy. It's one of our mainstays in our community. Back in the older days, all our forefathers had to go out in the ice and fish them. They didn't have the power saws or the the fancy equipment that we have today. Like today we have snowmobiles and power saws to help us set nets, where before they had to do it all by hand. They used to come up by horses. It's really a dying breed. There's not too many young fellas now want to take it up because you're out in the elements so much, and really there's not as good a dollar value as in the other species. And we'll saw out the holes, get the net all ready, and we'll close up the net. And the nets are 50 feet long, 14 feet wide, and they go anywhere from 4 feet deep to 12 feet deep. So when we go to fish it, we close the net and we haul it 25 feet of web out, and in the end, that's where we get our bounty from the sea. Hopefully it's a good catch. Some days it's better than others. And but we got to take the good with the bad. Nothing good in that end, eh? Nope. Right now we have 20 nets on the water, and we have to fish those every 3 days. We try to average 1,000 pounds a day. That's a ballpark number. That's what we got to make to cover our expenses. And then we do that. It takes till 4 or 5 o'clock every day. And then we got to get ready for the next day. You know, we got to take the fish to the fish plant. We got to repair any power saws that are broken, and get in the house where it's nice and warm. Put the furnace fires on and have a good hearty supper.
This weather update is brought to you by the NL 511 app. Know before you go. Check road conditions, highway cameras, and the provincial plow tracker with the NL 511 app.
I don't know about you, Ashley, but I'm already thinking about the weekend. Give us an idea of what we can expect come Sunday.
Yeah, so it does look like things are going to get pretty stormy this weekend for parts of the province. A nor'easter is headed our way as we head through Saturday night into Sunday, and it is going to bring some milder temperatures to a good chunk of the island, but also lots of moisture with this one as well. Let's take a look at what's going to happen rather. Now, there's not going to throw out any numbers at this point, but it is looking like some significant snowfall in parts of the province, followed by some significant rainfall. So let's just see what's going to happen as we head through Saturday afternoon. It does look like we should see some snow to start, which will likely be heavy at times through central, the west coast, and the northern peninsula. And then as the main event, or at least the warmer air moves in, I should say, we will see that transition through potentially ice pellets, even freezing rain over to rain. Now, temperatures will bump up by Saturday afternoon or Saturday, let's say early evening. Those temperatures will be in the single digits on the plus side of the mercury, 1 to 3 degrees by Saturday. Now, Saturday evening, overnight into Sunday morning, this is when the big push of warm air moves in. So say we're talking 10, 15 centimeters of snow for the western half of the island. This may even be a little bit more than that, but then that will be followed by 20 plus millimeters of rain. So, and it'll all happen within a 24 to 36 hour period. Now, the northern peninsula along the strait, some of the models pointing at 40 plus centimeters of snow, and then we could see some blizzard conditions with this certainly along the strait, or rather along coastal areas of Labrador through the afternoon on Sunday, and then eventually that will move off. So by the time Sunday rolls around, we're looking at temperatures 6 to 10 degrees across the island, and that's some of that milder air across Labrador as well. 3 degrees for Cartwright, so you may see a transition through to rain as well. Next week looks quiet to start anyway, hovering around 0 degrees, maybe a degree above or degree below with the chance of flurries through Tuesday. And similar for central and western Newfoundland, however, a little bit more unsettled towards the west coast, where we see the return of that onshore flow. And then for the eastern Labrador, you're looking at minus teens and minus 20s for the west. Take a look at this photo. Speaking of Labrador, good morning, Rigolette. Thank you for sharing that photo with us. If you have any weather photos, send them to nlphotos@cbc.ca.
Beautiful. I love that mist rising there on the water. What a nice start to the day. Labrador always has nice sunny winters. Before we go, I do want to correct something, a little error I made earlier in the show. I said the number that the province reports every day with hospitalizations is the number of people with COVID. That was a slip of the tongue. That number is actually the number of people who are in hospital because of COVID-19. Important distinction there, so I apologize for that error. And one question we didn't get to when I was chatting with Carolyn was, what happens if you recently had COVID and you're exposed again? Do you have to isolate? And we got an update this week from Dr. Janice Fitzgerald that if you had COVID after December the 20th, then you have a 3-month reprieve. So even if you're identified as a close contact of someone, then you will not have to isolate and get tested, because the assumption is that you had the virus recently, so you've got protection from being reinfected. They did warn that if new science comes out, they may have to change those rules, but that's what they're going with for now. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great evening, and I'll be back with you tomorrow night.